What is going on, everyone? We are doing the Tartakower Variation, which is just like the Mieses. E4, E5, knight F3, knight C6, D4, E takes D4, knight takes D4, and then the Schmidt Variation, knight to F6. We go ahead and exchange off the knights on C6, and they recapture with the B pawn. And here is the main event. The Mieses Variation pushes the pawn to E5, attacking the knight, while in the Tartakower, we're going to move our knight to D2, defending the E4 pawn, because that knight is attacking it, and it has to do one thing or another. The Mieses, it attacks. The Tartakower, it defends. Black has two sidelines and a main line. The sidelines are bishop to C5, attacking our F2 pawn, looking to jump the knight to G4, and the other sideline is D6, defending our push of E5. The main line is D5, striking out at our E4 pawn. We're going to chase down the rabbit hole of the main line first before we turn around and go to the sidelines at the very end. The reason why it's too late to push E5 is because black has a wide open center and the knight is perfectly safe to jump to G4. And they're only one move away from bringing their bishop to C5, doubling the attack on F2. If we were to ignore the threat, they could simply do it and there's nothing to stop it. They would win the exchange. And knowing that, there's only certain moves and they're all bad to stop that. One would be moving the knight again, which goes against opening principles, moving a piece twice. That defends the C5 square. Also, we could bring the bishop to E2, attacking the knight. So if they brought out the bishop, at least we could reduce a set of minor pieces. It's just overall not good. So we made our choice in the beginning to defend the pawn, and that's what we're going to do. The main line continues. Capture. Black is not going to capture with their queen or their knight because they have doubled pawns on the c file. By capturing with c6, not only does that undouble their pawns, that brings back a center pawn. Because black has an open b file, we don't want to castle queenside because a rook on that semi-open file would be an easy target for our queenside pawns. So we must develop our light squared bishop. The only square which makes sense is E2, but that's pretty weak, and our pieces are jumbled when we can go ahead and reduce some pieces. By checking the king on B5, black can only defend with the light squared bishop that makes sense. If they defended with the knight, that just doubles up a movement, and that goes against opening principles. They're going to want to defend with the bishop, so we just can't hang out there as well. It's making us act. And by exchanging, they're going to recapture with their queen, and that gets rid of their light squared bishop. And we have plans, since we're castling kingside, to fianchetto our dark squared bishop, which means our pawns are on the light squares. So by removing black's light squared bishop, that helps us out significantly. We want to go ahead and castle kingside, and black is looking to do the same thing, so they must develop their dark squared bishop. Out of the 4 squares which are safe to develop, the only one that really makes sense, that has some defense and backup, is just putting it on E7. None of our pieces are in danger, so we can go ahead and push B3 and getting ready to fianchetto that dark squared bishop. White's going to castle kingside, and then we can bring our bishop to B2 and set it in stone. We're good to go. The main line will continue with black putting the rook on E8, taking advantage of the completely open file. And we want to centralize our queen by bringing it to F3 to take advantage of all the open squares and access that it can easily get to. Black will then develop their knight to G4. If they had free reign, they would then put their dark square bishop on D6, doubling up on the H2 pawn. But we're going to go ahead and push H3, kicking out that knight before the bishop has a chance to. But the bishop has a trick up its sleeve. It can go to F6, and if we take the knight, it'll take our bishop. we would have to move the rook, and d1 is a perfect square. They would then move their rook to d8, complementing it. We would put our other rook on e1, and then the rook would come in, capture our e1 rook with check, and we would recapture. That's if we captured the knight. If we end up capturing the bishop, the knight would simply recapture and return to its post on f6. If you look at the analysis, 24 depth, all zeros. So there's a lot of different moves that can go from there, and that's going to finish up that line. So now we can go ahead and talk about the sidelines. First, we'll talk about d6. Since we can't push d5 because black would just be getting handed a free pawn, we have to figure out a space to put our bishop so we can castle kingside. e2 is a little too passive, and all the other squares are just not really doing too much. If we put it on c4, that could just get kicked out easy with a d5 push. So Mama Bear is just right in the middle. Not too warm, not too cold, just right. Bishop d3. It doubles up the protection on our e4 pawn as well. And now black, since they have a blocked dark diagonal, they're going to want to fianchetto their dark squared bishop. And we're still going to want to do the same thing. So the line will continue g6, b3, bishop g7, bishop b2, castle, castle. Black will put their rook on e8, taking advantage of the semi-open file, and we want to go ahead and put our rook on e1, defending our pawn, since black just added an extra attacker on it. And if you look at the analysis, the top 5 lines are all within a smidge, so this is where I'm going to cut it off, and you're on your own. I mean, basically, that's, how could I possibly tell you what's better in that situation? And last but not least, the second sideline, bishop to c5. The most common move, I guess we can call it the main line, is bishop to d3. Black will castle, we will castle, and then they will push d5, hitting the e4 pawn. Now, there's only 5 moves which won't totally throw the score in their favor. That is h3, e takes d, c3, c4, and queen f3. Yeah. I guess one that's kind of borderline is knight b3. That doesn't totally throw it over, but it's still bad enough. And that is that line. Second runner-up is e5. This is the exact same as the Mieses variation, only the dark squared bishop for black is not trapped in behind the queen on f8. The queen comes to e7, pinning the pawn so the pawn can't kill the knight. And just like the Mieses, our queen comes to e2 as well. Now the knight has to move, and d5 is the home it chooses to be. That'll go ahead and wrap things up for the Tartakower. I will mention that e2 is feasible, but there's way too many forks and splits. You can't determine what is the best move. I really do appreciate you guys. This concludes volume 20, and we're getting close to finishing this up. Thanks a lot.